Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Stevens, and this is the Psychology to Live By podcast. Welcome to Psychology to Live By. Joining me today on this roundtable are four favourite people from network music who really live their priorities. So I welcome Terry McBride, CEO, Chris Norwood, Head of Strategy, Karen Mix, Director of People Operations, and Colleen Novak, Music Manager. The podcast we will discuss is called Priority Living, a conversation with Bill Goodwin. But first, to a quick summary of the podcast. This podcast showcases Bill Goodwin discussing his book, Priority Living, 7 Pillars to Make Your Life Count. Bill is an author, a speaker, a leadership coach, and a hope strategist. He has 30 plus years of leadership experience in growing and building individuals and teams via leadership training, coaching, and speaking for personal growth. He's also a certified speaker and coach on leadership for the John Maxwell leadership team. Anyway, the central thesis of Bill's book is that to be happy and to have a life of satisfaction, one needs to base it on a clear purpose, or what Bill calls intentional living. This is a book informed by lived experience, not academic study per se. It's very hands-on with reflection questions, small group discussion prompts, and additional multimedia resources. As such, it's meant to be experienced, not just read. In the podcast, Bill discusses his pivotal life experience of dying and then being resuscitated, and how this second chance inspired him to not waste his life or to let it drift. And Bill has distilled his thinking into 7 pillars for living life according to one's priorities. And they are purpose, growth, impact, rhythm, explore, connect, and give. And Bill takes us through the 7 pillars with some earthy, real-life examples laced with pithy quotes. Throughout the podcast, we also discuss how contemporary psychology provides empirical support and guidance for much of what Bill has discovered. But now, as a matter of priority, to my good friends from Network Music. Hello, my good friends from Network Music. Are you all well?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I didn't ask if you were good because that's a moral question. That's more complex. But by and large, I think you'd probably score quite well. Now, this is a very interesting podcast. Bill and I got on very, very nicely. He's a very nice man. But I think we want to be talking about his book and about how that very pivotal life experience altered the trajectory of his life and how he's put that to good use. So as always, I'm really interested in and impatient for your views, your insights, your questions. Yeah, impatient.
Okay, I'll start then, since
Okay,
I'm
then.
usually more impatient than you are.
Fair
So
enough.
I noticed Chris nod to that. The younger Chris, not the older Chris.
Yeah.
Um, I found him very interesting in that, he really leaned on his faith to affirm his real life stories without having an opinion or point of view, which I thought was
Yeah.
a great use of that framing and that power. Um, Two things that he said really resonated with me a lot. Legacy is what we leave in others.
Yeah.
I thought that's really interesting. And within his 7 pillars, I found myself trying to figure out, well, which one have I progressed to? And I kind of landed in the explore bucket, which I think the younger Chris might disagree with, but that's okay. That's where I think I am. So, that was kind of my takeaway. It was a very interesting podcast because rather than it's just another clinical psychologist or something like that, it was someone who is not that, but has lived to talk.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And just a few little jumping off points from your responses, Terry. I too think that was a very, I think actually a central quote, the thing about a legacy being what we leave in people. So a legacy is not about how much money we earn or what buildings are named after us, et cetera, but that in fact legacy is the memory and impact we've had on other people, and of course this speaks to the research I think that we have mentioned before in this podcast from Harvard on life satisfaction, and that life satisfaction is centrally located in the quality of our relationships, and I think legacy is the same. I think that's right. I don't know whether it's about a progress through the pillars, though. In fact, I think if we were to ask Bill, he'd say, well, we need all 7 pillars to be operant. But it might well be that we need to work on one more than another. But knowing you, Terry, this is always dangerous, isn't it? On the personality dimension, openness to experience, you would score very highly. And so explore is a central value and a central feature of your psychology. So I think that's like a really defining thing. But I'm pretty sure if we look through the other 6 pillars, you've achieved a lot in your life, and I think you're pretty well. I think you're a pretty good fella, and you've done good in the world and created meaning and so on, and very purpose driven. So I'm pretty sure we won't do it, but we could map your success, the business's success, across these 7 pillars. The other little piece I'd like to pick up on, I had a minor trepidation before I spoke to Bill about the faith question, because I'm an ex-Catholic and a heathen, and I don't believe in an external God, and so I don't have that kind of faith. And I was, and we've all been accosted by people who push their opinions, and they base everything on biblical scriptures. That Stone Age book, Iron Age book, but he was nothing like that, and he spent many years as a pastor, and so that was a great relief. And I can interpret all, I can interpret it through the lens of psychology. He can interpret it through the lens of his religious faith, and that's fine. I think what really matters is the practicality and the factfulness of what he's discovered. That is real.
Yeah, I just like the fact that he didn't view it through that lens.
I agree.
He leaned on it for affirmation to what he was already seeing and feeling.
Exactly.
And that in itself is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And I really respected how he did that throughout the whole conversation.
I agree. And it does point to, I think, there's many roads to heaven, as it were. There's many ways, there's many paths, there's many metaphors, there's many theories, but we're all trying to approximate truth. And then if you get traction with a metaphor or a framework or a theory, and you validate it, then that's fine. It doesn't mean you've got the only path.
No, and Bill's going to be someone who makes a very positive difference in this world.
Yeah.
Period. And
exactly.
You can see that, you can feel it, you can hear it, and it's great.
Yeah, we had before we recorded, we just had a very relaxed, very nice conversation. A bit of laughter, and it was a very pleasant experience. And so that, I guess, that's another dimension of it, that you can kind of tell with people if their evolution's real, because there's a kind of pleasure in being in their presence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Terry. Thank you. Who's next?
I can go next.
Thank you, Chris. Chris Jr., I think you're
Jr.
now going to be referred to. Which makes me Chris Sr., I suppose.
That's right.
Old Chris.
It was so yeah, I found this really interesting, and I found myself looking at it through a couple of lenses. So obviously the perspective of like, how does this map onto the way that I approach my life, and how would I think of what I've done within the concept of these seven pillars.
Yeah.
But also from the angle of a parent. I have, an 8 and a 5-year-old child. And I think about like what I'm meant to do as a parent with them is get them to be like, let's say, quote unquote, successful. But why do we want them to be successful? Ultimately, we want them to be safe, secure, and have a fulfilling, satisfying life.
Yeah.
Right. And so it was interesting thinking about this and that framework. And I think you mentioned it you both mentioned a few times within the podcast, is like not necessarily about driving this like financial riches success. Right. And what I also found interesting related to that is, you can start to package some of these pillars together.
Yeah.
Right. Like you could have a career that drives your growth, has an impact. What were the others? Provides purpose, right? And maybe has some component of giving back, right? So all of a sudden, if you're doing a career that you have some connection to that can hit some of these different pillars, you can start to multitask, a bad word, but multitask your way through it and reap the benefits of all of these by being intentional around some of those life decisions that you might make.
Yeah.
And so, it's just an interesting framework I was thinking about in the context of what I'm meant to be doing as a parent and how we can help guide our kids to navigate this type of world and make good decisions that help them on a variety of different fronts to lead to that.
Yeah, and
Point
I agree.
satisfaction.
I agree with that, Chris. And it's kind of, in one sense, I think the book is a bit of a corrective, directing people's attention away from necessarily it being about money or it being about external success, and clearly about what's going to bring satisfaction, what's going to bring well-being, what's going to bring happiness, and so thinking about raising kids, of course, it's inculcating them with certain values that we know actually are a bit like the legacy piece we were discussing earlier. It's like actually what's really important, and what's really important is our relationships. It's what's really important is what we know from psychology, for example, is that altruism, generosity, kindness, compassion, giving are really good for self as well as the recipient. So inculcating that in your kids, right, which is like the polar opposite of so much social media messaging, which is all about aggrandizing the ego and getting more, and it's interesting. Often when people have been reaching out to me to come on the podcast, there's a little thing that sort of turns me off a little bit, and it's sometimes people talk about how many zeros they're earning since they had their big breakthrough, or
Yeah.
it's like no thanks. I'm happy for people to earn lots of money, but not to have that be the central thing, because it's not in the end what counts. And so I think the 7 pillars, as you say, I think they're facets of all one thing in many ways. They're not really distinct. And so at work, you can operate all pillars. In your relationship, you can operate all pillars. And I think we ought to have work where we can meet some of our important needs. I've forgotten where this was, but there's a distinction that's often drawn between a job, a career, and a vocation. And the idea is, for a job, you just turn up, you get paid, and your real life's outside work. And that's perfectly legitimate as a structure. And then a career is where you're meeting more of your deep needs at work as well as in your personal life. So it's more of a balance between those two. And rarely, but occasionally, people's work is actually a vocation where they're meeting pretty much all their needs. There's no distinction between work and their life. And again, it's not that one is better than the other, but it is important that we get our needs met. And I think that's largely what these pillars are about. And ironically, a significant dimension of these pillars is about giving to others and not about aggrandizing self. That the path to true happiness is that sense of generosity and less egoistic approach to the world. Yeah, but good luck with the parenting. It's an easy task. I'm sure you've got it nailed.
Got it all figured out from here.
Yeah. You just read this book, and now you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Thanks, mate. There are two ladies. Be curious to know who's going to jump in first.
I can go, Colleen, or do you want to go? Okay. More of observation, big takeaway for me was, I think it was very early in the podcast. It was discussed that as humans, there's a tendency to accept our lives, not lead our lives, or living someone else's priorities, which kind of made me think of like codependency, the negative sides of codependency.
Yeah.
My partner and we've recognized that time of our own lives as the big sleep. Like, oh, that was during the big sleep. So would seem that, at least for Bill and for myself, that there is a catalyst in life that sparks a change and kind of like, that catalyst makes you zoom up and take stock and begin living intentionally. So like when that, whatever it is, happens, his resurrection, wait a second, now I have to take stock. And I've only got this one life to live. So with intention, and from that, what is my purpose? So observationally, I thought that just resonated with me of like, okay, well, do you have to have that catalyst in order to recognize with awareness of living intentionally?
Good question. I don't know the answer, like empirically, like whether because clearly sometimes people have adverse life experiences like dying and being resuscitated, or, they have something terrible happens in their life, and it can be the making or the breaking of them. And often it doesn't always lead to growth, So in fact, there's a branch of psychology that explores post-traumatic growth now, as distinct from post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So that, but equally, I think positive experiences can reorient people. So for example, people might have a profound experience in nature that reorders their sense of connection to the world and to others around them. They might have a spiritual experience or a enlightenment experience. But I think whatever it is, it brings about a radical reordering of our sense of our relationship to the world and the world's relationship to us. And I think what that means at a practical level for human beings, for individuals, is that, as you say, they start to live intentionally, because what becomes visible is our socialization and our conditioning. Prior to that, there was just the water we were swimming in, right? In fact, we weren't in water, and then so suddenly there's a realization, oh, I'm actually allowed.
I can participate in this.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. I'm working with someone at the moment, and a lovely person, but she's got this incredibly harsh, self-critical narrative. And like I would say in our last session, she apologized to me about 5 times for being such a burden on me. And to which, of course, I laugh, and it's completely useless for me saying this, but I say to her, well, but I'm actually enjoying this. she either thinks I'm mad or lying or something. I don't know. But when you look at her, and this is like I'm using her as a metaphor then for our condition generally, she's completely lost and trapped in that narrative, and everything she shoehorns it to fit that narrative, even though there's so much evidence against it that's obvious to everyone else around her. Right. So there is this sense of waking up, I think, from the big sleep. And that's an enlightenment experience, right? It sheds light on, it wakes us up from a dream, and we start to get a bit more access to, well, what does living intentionally mean? It means that I can be aware of my conditioning, but I don't have to live out of it entirely. I can choose which aspects of it are helpful, and then I can practice in ways of being. And that's a much more exciting, more enlivening way to live. Yeah. And it's very interesting, isn't it? How old were you when you had that waking up experience?
When I woke up from the big sleep, I was early 40s, 42. Yeah.
Was there, if I can ask without, was there a precipitating event?
A divorce. Yeah.
Yeah.
A surprise divorce.
Yeah.
Which was like the making of me, right? Like it was like in this big sleep of like just doing things, and then, oh, that happened. Wait a second, there's so much more. And that zooming up and looking at like other relationships that were so important, and connection, and being intentional of what do I want the rest of my life to look like. So
yeah.
So
there'd be so many people listening, to this who resonate with that. It may not necessarily be a divorce, but it's some event. And the other thing is, I think we live. It's a topic, and it might be another podcast topic that I'm really interested in, and it's the topic of self-deception. And I think that we're familiar with the idea of other people deceiving us, but we're less familiar with the ubiquity, it's just the frequency with which we deceive ourselves.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the waking up out of that sleep is recognizing our self-deception. And that's a liberation, right? Because then you can operate in a way that's less constrained, less constricted by those self-deceptions. Obviously, this is not a new insight. There's a bloke called Sigmund Freud who knew a fair bit about.
Oh, that guy.
You remember him. But this idea that we repress things, or we suppress them, so we're not even aware that we're doing that. And I think there's something about, you guys might be familiar with the notion I call unimproving, and the idea that we can get to a point where we're fully cognizant of who we are, but we don't feel like, and there's a realization that's good enough, that I'm actually okay, which opens up a possibility for living that's more about play rather than self-improvement or pleasing other people or doing what, so it opens up a very different psychology in which people drop their defense mechanisms, right? And I often say to people, you're not ugly, like ugly in a general sense. What's ugly are your defense mechanisms. They're obscuring your natural beauty. Right, so if we can drop those, you don't need to do anything, because you were born perfect and you will die perfect from a value point of view, from a being point of view. And I think there's more than a number of times reading this book and talking with Bill, there was a sense of something relaxed inside him when he was given that second chance, right? And it opened him up to then being more positive in the world and being more open and more giving. Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That's like, it's really, really helpful for other people to hear that.
Absolutely.
Especially the way you laughed about it. That's delightful, right?
Oh,
What
absolutely.
did you call it? Surprise divorce. Was it what you
Surprise.
said? Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, we're done here. Oh,
Fantastic. Colleen, what's going on in your mind?
Well, there were a few things that I pulled from there, but just to kind of continue what Chris was saying, um,
Chris Jr.
yes, Chris Jr.
Mhm.
Um, when you're raising children, making sure that they're self-sufficient as well, and of course you want them to be happy, but you want them to, you know, find purpose, but you also want them to be self-sufficient, to be able to manage everything that is going to come their way. And I've been reading a lot about, being intentional and making lists of ways, things that you want to do and following through, but writing
Yeah.
it down, or just, I guess, being intentional.
Yeah. It seems obvious, and of course, in some ways, it is obvious, and it seems simple, and in many ways, it is simple. But as we know, things that are obvious and simple aren't always easy,
Mhm.
Exactly.
um, and they need to be modelled
Yeah.
as parents. Like, it's like,
Which I do so well sometimes.
well, obviously you are the master modeler of this. Um, but we just have to. What's most important, I think, in that modelling is the. It's like no one expects you actually to be perfect, but what do people what our kids are interested in, what other people are interested in, is your intention.
Hmm.
And so if they see you trying, they'll forgive you all kinds of slip ups. If your average is good, you're allowed to fuck up occasionally.
Yeah.
And that's what kids take away. They take away a sort of weighted average of their parents. They don't take away, all the highs and lows, really. And that's where they get their basic orientation to others and to the world, is from that sort of weighted average. So, because often, people can be a bit too perfectionistic about their parenting.
Yeah.
I've damaged them. I yelled at him, or something like that.
Yeah. There's that too, for sure. The guilt of it all.
Yeah, and it's not like that. Kids, they're smart. They figure out who you are, basically, and there might be some things we're not proud of as parents, but the kids will put that in the context of everything else. They're more robust than we give them credit for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of tied into towards the end, when you talk about connection, and I think how important that is to have
Yeah.
that strong connection with, maybe it's a couple of people, but it's just knowing that you have that. I think it's
Totally. It's
important.
it's very grounding. It provides a certain ballast when the waters are turbulent.
Hmm.
That we need that. We're social creatures. We need that connection. There's one other thing that really struck me out of his list, and it was rhythm. And there was a part in there where he was talking about, but basically, giving yourself permission to rest
Mhm.
and to recharge. And, you know, so much of my professional work has been with really high performing executives and, very successful, very driven people who aren't happy. they ought to be a lot happier. And they just find it very difficult to give themselves permission to relax and just be quiet and have some time to rejuvenate. In fact, when they do take time off, they often say, it was terrible because I couldn't relax. And I think this is a really, really widespread problem. And it's exacerbated by our digitally mediated world, so people can't sit still and maybe look at nature or just even feel the sensations of breathing or just be. It's to be constantly stimulated. And I really appreciated that little section, because when at first I thought, what's this rhythm business? But actually I think it's really important. And I remember Stephen Covey wrote a very famous book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in that, one of his little ideas, big ideas, was this prioritization matrix and 4 quadrants. And quadrant 2 was, where really high performers need to locate themselves. And that quadrant is when things are important but not yet urgent. And then he had lists of things that would occupy that quadrant. And one of them, some of them were things like exercise, sleep, play, relationship, aesthetic pursuits, and he's talking about very high performing people. But as a sort of strategic management of our overall balance. But I find that people feel guilty if they're doing these things, or that it's some sort of distraction or subtraction from their achievement. Right, that they can't afford to do it because there's so much work to be done. Right?
Or that those things also take work. You have to put effort into it.
I guess that's true. Yes, and I think that, so therefore, in that instance, learning how to rest is probably the most strategic thing the person can do. Have the massage, but also I think do the psychological work of what's stopping me relaxing, what's stopping me enjoying the life, what's robbing me of the pleasure of this existence that I currently have now, which objectively speaking looks great from the outside, but on the inside, I'm not really garnering the benefits, right? And so that's why I like this rhythm section, because I think it speaks to that psychological dilemma that so many of us are in, right? And I think he used a pendulum metaphor, whatever. It's give ourselves some time and space, invest in relaxing and well-being and recuperation, and it will make you happier, but it also pay dividends in making you more efficient, more creative. Yeah, so I was really interested in that part as well. Isn't it lovely? There you are, you get an email from someone you don't know who's written a book, and I feel like I've got another friend in the world, and now we've had a conversation that flows from it, and as always, our conversation is enlightening, enjoyable, hopefully mentally stimulating and relaxing at the same time. Isn't too much hard work, and so thanks again, guys, and we've got quite a few of these lining up now, which is great for the podcast. That we've got people reaching out who are doing great things in the world, and it's a great honour to bring those sorts of things to our audience, because there's so much shit out there. Not to put too fine a point on it.
Indeed.
All right, my friends. I'll see you next time. Take care. You've been listening to the Psychology to Live By podcast. If you like the podcast and want to know more, my website is www.drchris.life. There you'll find links to my various social media posts, a newsletter, and lots more. And share the podcast with people you like so they can like it too.